Okay. Thank you all for coming to our first H.O.P.E webinar on practice techniques. We will be recording this and posting it to our YouTube, so just a heads up. Yeah, so I shared the Google presentation in the chat a few minutes ago if you want to follow along there. We're not going to be screen sharing it, but it has all our topics and main questions that we'll be going over. There it is again. And yeah, so I'm just going to start off by introducing our panelists one by one, and then we'll go over some of the topics that we have outlined and some questions that were submitted previously when you guys all signed up. And then we'll have a question and answer at the end. If you have any questions for that time, you can either save it for then, or if you don't want to be on camera and would like me to read the questions for you, you can message me privately and then I'll read your questions then. Okay, so we'll just get started with the introductions. Alex, if you want to start us off.
Hi everyone, welcome to the first webinar. I'm Alex. Can you guys all hear me okay? Okay. I'm a rising high school sophomore from St. Louis, making me the only Midwestern representation here tonight. But after 10 years of piano experience and a lot of challenging practice days, I've accumulated my fair share of maybe questionable technique and practice methods, which I'm happy to share with you all.
Thanks, Alex. Next, Andrew.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew, and I'm a rising junior in college at Pomona College, and I'm from San Diego, California. And in my 14 years now of piano playing, I've had the great honor of playing in quite a few competitions as well as with orchestras. So today I really hope to encourage you all to practice with love and care. And I also want to talk about some ways to play with greater ease. And I'm so excited for this.
Thank you, Andrew. Next, Christopher.
Hello, everyone. I'm Chris, and I'm a 14-year-old rising sophomore who in southern New Jersey, so right across from Philadelphia. I've been playing piano for around 8 to 9 years, and throughout that, I've entered competitions. I've performed many times, so I've had my own share of practicing, like ups and downs with practicing as well as technique. And I wanted to share like about how to approach repertoire and how to overcome like technical difficulties in practicing today. So I hope I'll share with you everything I learned so far.
Thank you. Julia.
Hi everyone, I'm Julia, and I'm 16 years old and a rising junior in high school from New York City, but right now I'm in South Korea. So I've been playing piano for about 13 years, and this fall is going to be my 6th year at the Juilliard Pre-College. And I've also gotten injured twice from playing piano, but I've learned a lot of lessons from those experiences, so I'm excited to share that with all of you.
Next is Elizabeth.
Hi everyone. So I have been playing the piano for 10 years and I've had 4 years of experience teaching and working with other instrumentalists through collaboration and outreach. And also I have gotten injured a few times from not caring or caring too much about my practice or practice techniques. So I'm excited to share some of my experiences with you. And also I have played the violin for 3 years, and thanks to my musical background, I was able to learn quickly in that as well. So excited to meet you all.
Ophir.
Hi everyone, I'm Ophir, a rising college junior from California. Music, at least for me, has played an essential role, not only as a skill that I kind of work on every day, but also as a source of personal growth. So I'm excited to discuss and answer questions about practicing, but also just music in general.
And last but not least, Soda.
Hi everyone, I'm Soda. I'm going to college next year, and I'm from the Bay Area, like most of us. I would say I find a lot of common ground with Ophir. Like music is sort of like a daily integral part of my life. But that being said, it's also, I guess the high school journey for me has been trying to balance music against academics a lot because I want to pursue both in college. So a lot of practicing has been for me like not necessarily practicing a ton, but practicing smart. So making like the most out of what little time you have between like schoolwork and free time. So I can share some of how like that worked out for me.
Cool. Thank you to all our panelists. So just a reminder, during this time, it'd be great if you could keep your mute button on. And yeah, so we're just gonna jump into it. Our first topic is about warming up in general. So our first question is just gonna be for each topic, something more generic. So first we'll be talking about how do you warm up, what kinds of exercises, and how long. So we'll start with Ophir for that. That's okay.
So for warming up, I like to do some improv. I don't know if people generally like to start with improv or technique and stuff like that. But I think with scales and exercises, you kind of warm up your fingers. But with improv, you can warm up your heart and your ears, and so it's kind of a similar thing, but on the other side of the coin.
Thanks, Ophir. We also have Elizabeth and Alex. We'll go in that order.
Yeah, so I usually, as a kid, I would warm up with scales and arpeggios, and I would mix them up and have a lot of fun with them. Unfortunately, now I don't really do that anymore. I now kind of just jump straight into my repertoire. But I definitely used Hanon, Czerny, Pyshna, Moszkowski etudes, Chopin etudes, and just a bunch of different etudes. So. Also, one more thing, in the winter, my hands would get really cold, so I always made sure my hands were warm before I practice.
Alex?
For me, I've gone like more the traditional route. For basically 10 years now, I've been playing scales, arpeggios, Hanon, Czerny, and I still do some Pyshna to this day. I usually don't spend more than 15 minutes actually like just warming up in and of itself. So yeah.
Our next question, leading right into that, is what about etudes? So are there any specific composers? I know you guys both mentioned Hanon, Czerny. Do you recommend any specific etudes for any techniques? We'll start with Alex and then go Christopher, Julia, and then Elizabeth.
Especially for beginners, I would definitely recommend Hanon, Czerny, Pyshna. Those are just for getting good technique and good finger independence to start out with. For the more intermediate advanced, yes, you definitely need to consider at least learning a couple Chopin and Liszt etudes, especially for like the ones that your technique is not so excellent in, so you can work to improve that.
For me personally, like I heard people talk about Hanon, but I've never done Hanon. Instead, I did a lot of Czerny, which I think is good for more beginner intermediate students to warm up because they're like fast scales and help your fingers move faster, which really helps your fingers to warm up. And also, I think when you go into like the later advanced or like late intermediate, Chopin etudes are a good way to warm up because all of them have fast passages that really help your fingers get into shape and get physically warm too. Or Liszt etudes really touch on a lot of different hand or like technique, different things. So basically just like try to find something that's technically challenging for me. It doesn't exactly have to be an etude, but an etude like, and then just run through it a couple times. And I think that's how I warm up most of the time.
Julia?
So not to contradict anything that anyone has said so far, but when I was younger, a lot of my teachers recommended that I do like Hanon and Czerny etudes, and that's actually what got me injured the first time I got injured because I was so like fixated on like perfecting the technicality of my playing that I didn't really stop to think that like whenever I was playing, like my fingers and my wrists were really stiff. So I think that it's really important to make sure that when you are playing these etudes, because I do agree that etudes are important, and I do use Chopin etudes to warm up now. But I just think that it's also important to focus on your technique and make sure that you're not like fatiguing yourself so much that by the time you actually start practicing your repertoire, like your arms are hurting and stuff like that.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, I agree with all the things the three panelists have said before me. Definitely, when I used to warm up, I used a lot of Hannon and Czerny for etudes, and then I switched over to Moszkowski, and then I switched over to Chopin etudes. But if you ever feel pain when you're practicing, which we'll discuss later, definitely stop and like relax your hands, your arm, forearm, wrist, all of that stuff. Another thing, I think Chopin etudes definitely have a musical aspect to them. So it's not just turning off your brain and making sure your fingers are running back and forth. There's definitely a lot of thinking in it as well.
Yeah, for sure. And so now leading from talking about using etudes to warm up, we also had some questions about stretching or more physical hand exercises to get blood flowing in your fingers. So we'll go back to Ophir for that.
So there's one stretch I like to do that tends to work for me. It's sort of like a twisting thing. So if you put like, let's say first and second fingers, like a fourth apart, or maybe a fifth, depending on your hand size, you kind of like twist your wrist, sort of like that. Is kind of hard to see, but I think that tends to sort of loosen things up and give a good stretch before you jump into rep.
Like something like.
Yeah, like you would play like first and second fingers, or second and third, second, third, fourth, and fifth, or yeah, play like maybe a fourth apart or something, just two at a time. Yeah.
Cool. We'll go to Andrew.
Okay. When it comes to stretches, something that I like to do isn't really so much with the hands as much as it actually is with the shoulders. So I definitely, a lot of times, like on the way to piano lessons, like on the car ride, like I would literally just kind of like raise my shoulders and then drop them and then maybe like roll them, forwards and backwards. And I think that's a really important aspect of piano playing as well, is not only what goes on like with the hands as well as the arm, but also what your shoulders are doing. Like, are they raised or are they completely dropped? It's actually something that makes a huge difference in your playing if your shoulders are completely loose, completely dropped. And it's something that even an experienced player like myself often kind of struggles with and has to make sure like that I'm totally observing that. So that is definitely something that's helped me.
And then we'll have Elizabeth answer, and then Alex, you can round us up for this topic.
Okay, so there's a bunch of resources I found on YouTube that it's like hand exercises of all types. Especially I like the one where you put your hand out in front and then you go like that and then you go the opposite way. So for like both of that. And also I just kind of like sometimes massage my fingers to make sure there isn't like any tension inside. I mean, I don't have all the right answers, but that's just like what works for me. So, also Tai Chi balls can work sometimes. They're kind of fun to like move around your hands with. So.
All right, so I'm gonna demonstrate two stretches that you can do, like actually at the piano. These are taken from the Spooner regimen. So the first one is the Brahms stretch, invented by Johannes Brahms himself. So what you do is you take your dominant tone. In this case, we'll take C, and you take a major triad above that, and then you take the leading tone, and then we go up that way, and then we play the tonic again, and then we play the lowered second triad coming down. So in this case, it would be a D flat major arpeggio. And then we can modulate. So this works better for people that have smaller hands, and it works on the stretch, especially between the fourth and the fifth fingers, which is generally very small for beginning pianists. The next stretch I'm going to demonstrate is the Horowitz stretch, famously used by Vladimir Horowitz. If your hands are tiny, you can do this with a fourth. If your hands are bigger, you can do it with a fifth. So what you do is you play the fourth or fifth, broken, and then you just go up a chromatic scale. And you're only using here your fourth and your fifth fingers. So while your fourth and fifth fingers are playing, your thumb should be as far away from the pinky as possible. So it should be reaching in the opposite direction of what you're playing. This helps stretch your entire hand and get warmed up very fast. So that's all I have for this.
Nice. Thank you. I hope you guys picked something new up. I definitely did. We'll be moving on to specific technique. So our first question was about left hand dexterity and independence, and specifically if there was any kinds of good exercises or repertoire that can help work that out. So we'll go in this order: Elizabeth, Soda, Alex, and Andrew.
Okay, so for left hand independence, I definitely I think that if someone just focuses more on one thing, then they'll be able to get it better in anything in general. So I like to take away my right hand and then practice only with my left hand or do some exercises with my left hand.
Soda.
Sorry, my bad. Just in general for finger dexterity, I would say the most helpful thing for me has just been scales. Like play your scales, play them major, minor, and melodic minor, harmonic minor, and just natural minor also. Do them contrary motion, 4 octaves. Make sure you can get them down in every key. And then, work your way up for tempo always, but also return to slower tempi and make sure that you can play them like staccato or very legato, or articulate them well, accent like different beats, stuff like that. That just helps a lot with finger independence and your stamina in general. I think with regard to specific pieces, I remember playing Moshkovsky 15 Virtuoso Etudes number 2. That one is like all left hand. So, obviously there's Chopin Revolutionary as well. You can also look into, and this is for finger independence, when you're just working on a chord heavy piece, try voicing the chord to like a different finger, like the same chord, but bringing out just every finger differently. Like it doesn't matter what the piece is, just pick a nice chord and try and make one finger louder than the others. That'll help with just controlling independence as well.
For me, for left hand, I started a lot with Czerny's Opus 718. It's 24 easy studies for the left hand. And it has everything from scales and rotations to double thirds, octaves, jumps. It has basically the whole drill. So if you really want a good starting book, it's Czerny, 24 studies for the left hand, Opus 718. So I highly recommend it.
We have some additional people answering this question. I think actually almost all 7. Yeah, so Andrew, and then we'll have Christopher and Ophir.
Oh yeah, about strengthening or working on the fluency of the left hand technique. I definitely agree with Soda that scales are extremely important for that purpose. I would also add though that it really helps, at least in my case or in my experience, to practice scales with left hand separately, to listen to the quality of the left hand when you hear it all by itself. Like, is it even? Is it phrased nicely? These are some questions that you should definitely be asking yourself in that case. and a specific etude, and it doesn't really actually have to be this etude, but actually any etudes with similar patterns, is one by Czerny as well, and it's from Opus 299, and I believe it's number 7. And what I really like about it is that it has this kind of recurring sort of left-hand pattern. So not only are you able to kind of practice finger independence, but you can also experiment with rotating, like having rotation in your left hand and making sure that you can play it not so much just with the fingers, but also with the help of your arm, and then increasing kind of the comfort and fluency of the left hand that way.
I don't know if it's just me, but I never really like found left hand dexterity to like develop from Czerny etudes or like those drilling etudes. I found them to really develop after you go through a lot of different much harder repertoire as you advance. Like when you have like a piece that has a long left hand passage that's really fast, then you're kind of like forced in your mind to like get over this hill, like this hump, and then you have to like overcome it. And then I think that's how I really developed it. I saw Solomon said PTSD from 10-4. I fully agree. Like Chopin etudes have like a lot of left hand stuff, especially 10-4. Like I think that's how you really overcome the left hand dexterity, because if you're just thinking about drilling and you just play scales in your left hand, then you're not really like trying to challenge yourself. You're just trying to like improve. But when you have something that's like an obstacle from getting to close to somewhere perfect, then I think that's what really helps you to develop your left hand dexterity and your mindset too.
Definitely, I think that left hand dexterity has to do not only with like technical development, but also musical development. Just like I think the reason that the right hand is usually stronger is because right hands usually have melodies and usually shape more, and you just develop a finer kind of like range of pressures in the right hand. I feel like a lot of people think that it's because most people are right-handed, but I'm left-handed and my left hand is weak. Yeah, I think in general, like playing works for the left hand. For example, like Scriabin's is it a nocturne? Not Prelude and Nocturne for the left hand. Bach, Brahms, Chaconne for the left hand. I think playing left hand pieces that challenge you to phrase things and to play very musically can benefit a lot for that kind of development.
Cool. Next question is, and this is actually something that applies to me very much. Any tips for us poor pianists with small hands? Well, I'll have Elizabeth answer first and then Julia.
Okay, so funny story. I had really small hands as a kid, but I don't know if I would recommend this, so take this with a grain of salt, but it was kind of like stretching for me, like how a gymnast can become flexible. So I would put the ends of my fingers or like 2 fingers on specific set of keys that would stretch out my fingers, and I would just like relax and let it there for a few minutes or a few seconds or whatever. And then slowly and I also tackled some like big repertoire, so slowly I just developed like bigger hands, and I can barely stretch an 11th now, so.
So fun fact, or it's not really fun, but a fact is that Schumann actually like cut the webbings of his fingers so that he'd be able to stretch more because he was frustrated with however much he could stretch then. So I'll say don't do that. But also, so I can reach a 9th and I can reach a 10th if I press all the notes in between, but that's not really practical. So I would say just get really comfortable with rolling chords or just like bigger intervals in general. And also don't be afraid to like find shortcuts or refinger things because you're not like cheating the music if it works better for you. But just in general, like just learn tips and tricks for how you can like rearrange chords. So for example, like if there's a really big chord in your left hand, but you're only playing like one note in your right hand, you can take the top note of the left hand chord with your right hand.
We'll also have Andrew as a response for this question.
Yeah, I think adding on to what Julia was talking about with rearranging or kind of adapting some of the things that you see in music, like big chords, for example. Definitely, I definitely think it is okay when you have some big chords to actually, I think in the case of your right hand, you can omit like the lowest notes of some of the big chords, and in the case of the left hand, you would omit like the higher notes, and that's a common thing, and it's still possible to get a very full sound from a chord as though it were the entire chord, but with fewer notes or without the notes that you cannot reach. And I would also add, this isn't so much about how to increase the size of your hands or stretch things, but more just a general comment about how I believe you can approach these bigger intervals comfortably. For example, octaves is not exert your hand so much to the point where it's really stretched and really kind of flexed or tensed out, but try and see if you can sort of loosely with your hand cover the notes that you want to play, and be sure to do this in the most relaxed way that you possibly can. I think that's really important.
Thanks. Okay, our next question is a little bit kind of on the opposite end, but not that farly related. What are some ways to improve octave accuracy and sound quality? And specifically in passages where there's a series of octaves. So we have Ophir, Soda, and Christopher to discuss that.
So I'm also working on this concerto now. I wish I knew who asked the question, because I'm curious as to what specific passage, but definitely in the development there are, tons of tricky things going on with octave leaps and that huge octave cascade thing in the beginning of the development. Some things that are helping for me are kind of well, first of all, keeping your fingers close to the keys. I think that's really helpful. Also practicing pinkies alone and thumbs alone, because what an octave really is it's just, your pinky and your thumb jumping many times. And for octave leaps, for I guess like wider intervals with octaves, it's helpful to play like the pinky of the lower octave go into the thumb of the higher octave, if that makes sense. So it's sort of like you're looking at, I guess, like the smallest leap that you really have to make. And if you get comfortable with that, everything else kind of falls into place more easily.
So I don't want to become scales man, but also scales and octaves are very helpful. Do them in all keys, do them chromatic. There are also any number of octave etudes, like there's Chopin Butterfly, there's Chopin Octave Etude, there's I think 5 Czerny Octave Etudes. There's a set of Brahms Übungen, which features many octave etudes. I would say that for leaps, I mean, it's actually very helpful also to play legato octaves, and they like develop octaves with like 3rd and 4th fingers as well, and those will help your leaps actually tremendously, because I mean, a leap is like, it seems more daunting than legato, but it's actually like harder if you think about it, because with legato you actually have to connect your fingers, whereas with like leaps, I mean, you're pretty free and you should be relaxed when doing them. I was also working on Brahms D minor for a large portion of last year. I would also have to add that for the passages with repeated octaves, you have to be very good at using your wrists, and in multiple ways. Like if they're very fast and repeated and close to each other, then like a small wrist motion is just very helpful for like rapid fire octaves playing. But if they're like repeated but also like big jumps, then one specific thing that helped me a lot is you can play an octave by dropping your wrist, or you can play one by going into the key or like into the piano, kind of like almost into the fallboard, and doing like both in combination, like alternating your wrist like that is just like a very fluid motion, and it'll help you like get the octaves repeatedly without having to like re-articulate every single time, if that makes sense.
I've come across a lot of octaves, like repeated octaves and like fluent like scale like octave sections a lot. Like I know like Chopin Opus, the octave etude, Opus 2510. I think there's two different types of like octave passages, ones that are legatoed and ones that are leaps or like staccato, like rapid fire, like going up and down the keyboard. I say that when you're doing one of those legato things, always try to switch your fifth and fourth finger and third finger around if you can reach it. Personally, I have big hands, so I don't know about the small hand gang over there, but when you're going down chromatically or even like a whole step, I say try doing 1-5, then go down 1-4 or go up 1-4, because then it really helps connect it better, and then it releases the tension on your arm, and it'll feel like just like a running passage instead. And I think overall the whole point of like overcoming octave passages is releasing the tension in your arm. So always release your shoulders and try to take the weight out of your forearm as much as you can. And one thing that I really had to overcome was when I was going down, like if anyone plays Chopin Opus 48 number 1, like when you're going down octaves, when it's not a hard octave passage, but you have to play it really deep and instead of like bangy. So I say like play into the keys, like don't think you're playing octaves, but think you're playing like a scale down, like a passage down. And then it's really all mental. Like half of it is physical, but the other half is mental, which is pretty much everything with piano. So I think you should also try to think about that when you're overcoming these passages.
Yeah, for sure. Chris, I'm going to throw an extra question back at you that just came from the chat. Any tips on sound quality and accuracy when you have sweaty hands? And for specifically making sure that you don't slip with your sweaty hands.
Wait, can you repeat? You just lagged in the middle of that.
Oh, sorry. Any tips on sound quality and accuracy when you have sweaty hands and making sure that you don't slip?
I say when you have sweatier hands, always angle your fingers more downwards, because no, not more downwards, sorry, like try to flatten your fingers as much as you can, in my personal opinion, because the more you do this on a black key, the higher chance you have of it slipping down onto a white key instead by accident, and then there goes your passage. When you have sweaty hands or you're working on sound quality, I say like try to think about the weight you're putting on your keys, because really you shouldn't be playing with your arm force, you should be playing with your arm weight. Like that's why a lot of like everyone says sit in the middle so that your forearm is like level with the piano keyboard, so you can like adjust the weight that you're putting onto your fingers of your arm with your wrist. So you should always do that in your octaves. If you see people working on octave passages, like or playing octave passages, you see their wrists like fluctuating up and down as they're playing. And that's really just like adjusting the sound quality and the volume of the octave to their preference. And I see like Alex saying that do that passage from Rigoletto. When the octave passage at the end, I think you should just try to release your shoulder as much as you can, because I know it hurts when you come down and then when you go back up and like it's all octaves, just like in like 16th notes. So always relax your shoulder, but play with your arm weight instead. And then like rapid, like just up and down motion instead of, or like sliding up and down motion like that when you're doing chromatically, instead of trying to tense your forearm and then play like that. Let's hope that works out. Yeah.
Well, thank you. We will move on. Our next question is about how to handle long jumps with a single hand. Especially, I'm thinking probably this is in the left hand, but it was asked specifically about jumps ending with chords and just making sure that the sound is consistent, especially in chords. I know that's definitely something that might take a lot of work. So we'll start with Andrew and then go to Elizabeth, Ophir, and Chris.
Okay. Something that has definitely helped me with leaps is practicing them by playing the first note in the leap and then leaping to the last note in the leap, but not actually playing that note and just seeing where my finger lands. And yeah, this is something that I would do. And then eventually like it would become more consistent, the leap. And I'm not really sure how this works. It's just kind of something that I thought of doing one time, and in my experience has kind of helped. I think maybe just not feel as anxious about making that leap. And also, yeah, just really like monitoring like what exactly is happening with my hands. And then something that I saw in a masterclass on YouTube by Robert Levin, who is a pretty awesome teacher, I believe. He was a music professor at Harvard and also gives a lot of master classes. And he said to look at the note with your eyes before like you make that leap, and just look at the key. And he said that saves a lot of practice and allows you to land on that note. And I haven't really tried doing that as much since I kind of had my own sort of way for doing this, but I do trust in his advice, and I think it's worth also considering.
Yeah, so for me, I agree with what Andrew said, and also when you just have this one leap that you're trying to focus on, it would be focusing on the note that you're at before the leap, or the chord you're at before the leap, and then eyeballing your target and then just jumping there automatically as like practice, like back and forth to see if you're landing on it or not. And you can definitely start slower and then build it up.
And Ophir, we'll wrap this up.
Yeah, I think for leaps, it definitely is. I think they're more mental actually than physical. A lot of them, and I think it's kind of about being able to know where you're trying to go and being able to think about that very quickly while you're playing. I think it's more about being able to think fast about it. Because if you practice it a lot at a slower tempo and all of that, even if you do that at a faster tempo, if your brain scrambles when you're trying to find that leap, it's gonna go haywire. But I think also there's some things with timing that I feel like, of course it depends on the piece, but I think with most leaps, you can kind of, get in ahead of time so that you make it in one piece. So yeah.
Cool. Our next question is, if you can play something slowly, can you play it quickly? So we'll go with Andrew first and then Elizabeth.
Okay, so I think the context of this comes from is probably from the two-set violin video that was really popular, right? Yeah, it was like the Ben Lee, the guy who played Flight of the Bumblebee really fast, and then he said, well, really fast, but like not super cleanly. And then he said, like, if you can play something slow, you can play it quickly. And yeah, I'm guessing like that's where that came from. And well, I believe I sort of get where he's coming from, even though it's not like totally not totally accurate. So yeah, let me think of ways in which it's like it sort of makes sense. So if you feel like you can play something like very fast, but then when you like actually try to play it slowly, you run into problems. Like this is actually something that can happen. And so it's why slow practice is really important, because it actually kind of exposes like some of the problems that you have in your playing or in your technique, that like maybe something is not super clean, and like the only reason that you've been able to play it so fast is actually because like you were kind of like rushing over or skipping over some parts. So I think that's where it's sort of relevant. And also, yeah, like slow practice is kind of like a really good step to like being able to play something fast in the future.
So while I love two-set violin, and I kind of agree with the statement. I also kind of disagree. So I agree in the sense that if you're definitely having trouble with a passage or specifically a quick technical passage, it's good to slow down and like start from a slower speed. But I would recommend then slowly upping the tempo so you can reach your goal tempo. Another thing is, for example, if someone is training for a running race, you can't just always practice by running slowly, right? You have to have intervals in which you speed up a little bit. And so sometimes it's not only good to practice slowly up the tempo with the metronome, but also to just practice it in a normal performance tempo to see how it is.
Cool. So that will wrap up our specific techniques topic. We're going to move on to, in general, practicing repertoire. So I guess our first question is, what are some specific personal practice techniques that you use when you're working on repertoire? So we'll start with Elizabeth and then go to Alex and Chris.
Okay, so for my personal practice techniques, I guess I don't really have any like special things, but I like to definitely mix up my practice and start every day with a different piece. So so I can just like look forward to some things for the day that are not like mundane or whatever. And I definitely like to break my repertoire down into small pieces and practice small sections. And then depending on where I am in the piece, I will try to combine them together into a larger picture.
I have a few practice techniques that are a little bit more specific. One of my favorite practice techniques is for those fast runs, those fast light runs. So I'll take a passage, for example, from Rigoletto. So you, on like the fourth page, you have a pretty fast right hand run that sounds something like this. Sorry. And to make sure that every single note speaks clearly, one of my practice techniques is to repeat notes. Let's like a certain number of times. So in this case, let's just do 3 notes. So I'm gonna take every single note of that passage and play it 3 times. And I'm gonna make sure that every single note, every single time I play it, speaks clearly. That way, and the notes that don't speak clearly are most likely the notes that aren't gonna sound clearly when I play it one note by note. So this really helps you build muscle memory, and it helps you also solidify your fingering a lot. Because sometimes when we play these fast passages, our fingering changes like every once in a while, and we get a little bit careless. So by playing it multiple times, we have to decide mentally what finger we're going to use, and that solidifies our muscle memory.
For me, I like to stick with the traditional techniques of practicing. Slow practice. If you don't do it, you should do it, because after years of experience of not liking slow practice, I suffered painfully, and I made a lot of memory slips, and my passages were sloppy and stuff. So you should always do slow practice. Like it's not a lie when like people tell you like slow practice like helps your fingers will automatically like click to where the right note is. Like that's what happens when you do slow practice. But like slow practice, I differentiate between focused and mindless, because you could just sit at the piano and then cross your legs and then like think about ice cream while you're like repeating like a section really slow like 10 times. That's not going to get you anywhere. I say like switch it up a bit. There's different methods to do it. You could do broken rhythms, which is playing like a swing rhythm for straight notes, like a dotted note, then a short note, dotted note, short note. or you can switch it up the other way. Or if that gets you tired, try playing it a bit faster tempo, but like still under tempo. But overall, you should really try to stay focused during the slow practice. And it might be painful and like really frustrating, but it really pays off in the end, especially when you're out there on stage and then you're like panicking, but like your fingers know what to do because you did slow practice.
Can I
And
jump back? Oh, go on.
oh, you can go. Tell me what.
Okay, so just from like a neurological standpoint, when you play fast, you play fast, like, and that's the only thing you do. You're actually building something up called a serial memory. So that's like the memory you get from just playing fast all the time, and that's like more like my fingers go in the right place, but I don't really know what's going on. When you practice slowly, it helps build another layer on top of that serial memory, and that's called ingrained memory. So like that, what that does is like you actually know where you are through the piece at any time when you're playing it through memorized. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like, I think a lot of people when they don't do slow practice, what happens is that like I think someone mentioned it before. Like you like you're playing and then someone asks you to play it slow, but you can't play it slowly. You can only play it fast, which is the opposite of what should be happening. On the other hand, you should always be able to have a good foundation, which is the slow playing, and then you can speed that up faster. So I'm just gonna try to keep it quick, but like one thing I do like a lot personally is I try to play it slow, but like I completely relax my hand like this, but I use my pure finger strength to play accented notes on every single accented notes on like a fast run, or like a long passage, like third movement of Chopin 2. Like there's this really long right hand passage if you know it. Um, for example, like those stuff, you should like if you really do slow practice with all your fingers accented. In my personal experience, it really helps like develop the strength of your fingers for like each turn and like each different note or like different leaps. So it really solidifies your muscle memory as well as like finger and mental strength for that passage. And it really helps solidify it in the end.
Cool. Oh wait, sorry. If it's okay, I'll just add like one small thing to, you know, the discussion that we've been having about practice. And it's also about slow practice, really. I wanted to mention this quote, this quotation by Haydn, who I think is the person who said this. And it's a little bit humorous, but here it is. It's, if you think you're already practicing very slowly, then practice slower. And I'm not sure about how literally you should take this advice, but I do believe that oftentimes when you're practicing at a certain tempo, it's always worth asking yourself and considering if you can actually practice at a slower tempo and if that will help you a bit more in kind of understanding certain things about the piece or about the technique that you need to play a certain part. So you can always think about practicing slower. And another final thing is that practicing certainly is a really important part of being a pianist and being a musician. And we're all here today, and I'm pretty sure that we all really love to play, and we all really love music. And I think we can also extend that sort of appreciation for the music into how we practice and into how we kind of like examine every detail of the piece that we're playing. I think we should do this out of a place of really appreciating the music.
Cool. Our next question is how many pieces or how much music should one practice in a day? And this would be in considering at what point are you spreading too thin your own efforts and time in a day's worth of practice. So we'll have Chris answer and then Ophir.
Personally, I practice a lot of repertoire nowadays since it's quarantine. I'm trying to learn new things. I think a really good thing is to prioritize what you're playing and the pieces you have. because you should really try to like have a list down, like what's important, what should I get done today, and like what, like plan out your schedule, like what's coming up most recently, what's the next thing you have to play really soon. Oh my god, I can't word that. So you should really try to prioritize, then that helps you like figure out what you need to practice. And if you're like on a really busy schedule, like for example, like if you have AP test next week but you have like 2 solo recitals the same week, and you have to have like an hour repertoire, really try to focus on focused practice, because you don't have to practice long for it to be effective, especially if you're going to school and you have homework. Really try to zone in on getting what you need to get done, set goals, and then complete them, instead of setting hours and like, I'm going to do 2 hours today. Think of what I'm going to fix today, and that's what I'm going to get done. And I think that's what really helps.
Yeah, I think like definitely with practicing, I think it varies from person to person, but I personally tend to notice diminishing returns after a certain amount of time, which I think a lot of people can probably relate to. So I mean, and usually that's around 3 to 4 hours if it's like one session. I think Rubinstein said that if you practice too much per day, then you won't experience life and you won't have anything to express in your music, which is definitely true. So finding that balance between practicing, but also just being a normal person. Yeah.
All right, thank you. If you guys haven't checked the time, it is almost been an hour, so you are free to go. We are recording and it will be uploaded, so I'm going to put that out there. And we're going to wrap up this section and then have, I guess, one Q&A break so that we can have some live Q&A. But yeah, I just want to let you know. Okay, so next question is, are there any methods to speed up the process of initially learning a piece and getting it into your fingers? So I think Ophir has an answer, and then Elizabeth.
Yeah, for learning quickly, there are a few memorization techniques that definitely help for me. Like if you try playing a measure and then look away and then try playing it again, for example, and that sort of thing, just kind of playing these games with yourself. I mean, it is kind of like, yeah, it's very mind intensive to memorize things quickly. So I mean, unless you have like a really good reason to do so, I wouldn't recommend it, because I think if you just kind of let yourself take a couple of weeks or months to learn something, it will probably be more fruitful in the end, and I think that you'll know the piece better.
So for some concerts or other gigs I had where I had to memorize things, sometimes I would procrastinate just a little bit. So during those times, I resorted to looking more for patterns, and really I do agree with Ophir on this. The mind intensiveness, like involving so much brain power, just focusing so much and trying to mentally understand and remember those patterns, the fingering, and the musical structure itself, and that really helps. But normally I don't think there is a method to speed up learning a piece or getting it in your fingers fast, other than practice itself. So I don't think there's any real shortcut.
Nice. Next, tricks or techniques to help with practicing slow lyrical passages to try and ensure a singing tone. We'll go with Andrew, and then Chris, and then Elizabeth.
Okay. Something that I think really helps is being aware of kind of the rhythm that exists in these more lyrical passages. So often you'll have passages that are kind of divided into triplets or 16th notes or 8th notes, and often there's like a downbeat and like an upbeat in these scenarios, or there are notes that are slightly more accented and then notes that are slightly less accented. And I think it's really important to follow those kinds of rules. For example, if you have like an 8th note group, then you have like the first eighth note being slightly more accented than the second eighth note, or in a 16th note group or triplet group, the first notes are also generally more accented. And certainly in a 16th note group, like the second and the fourth note, you definitely should not be accenting those. And then another really important thing, I believe, and it might be a little bit hard to elaborate on, but it's definitely nice to not just engage the fingers when you're playing these passages, but also really kind of minimize like the feeling of striking down on the keys by adding in your arm weight and allowing your arm to move with your hand. Yeah, that's just a little preview into like something that really helps.
I fully agree with the rhythm. Like, you should always maintain like a steady like knowledge of what the rhythm's like, where triplets are, and where it switches back to like quarter notes or like eighth notes. But I think like what really helps keep the singing tone is singing, like physical singing, like or like mental singing. Like I was inspired to start singing while playing because I personally played Rigoletto, like Alex did, and it's an opera, and opera people sing. So I thought, why not try like mentally singing to this, or like even like whispering yourself to it. And I think that really helps with like the timing of like your rubato, or like your knowledge of like how to phrase it, or like how to make it sound more musical. And it really helps you because a lot of singers have a much broader, have a much more wide spectrum of being able to phrase notes such as like glissandos, up and down, and like vibrato, but we can't do that. So I think that one thing we can do is pretend we're doing that and then try to like mentally like do the same thing to our own piano. And I think singing really helps with that. And what Andrew said about the hand, another thing about singing is like you should like walk your hand down instead of striking. Like the arm weight, like if you have your arm hanging down like this, and then you do this, and then you just walk your hand down, your pinky is a bit higher. So you have to walk it this way, and walk it this way, walk it this way. And that really helps with the legato feel and connects the notes better in a much more deep and singing tone.
Nice. So, Chris, I have another question for you, which is our next question. What are some helpful drilling patterns? I know you mentioned, I think it was you mentioned dotted rhythms before. Do you have any other suggestions?
Yeah, I think I touched on this before. You should go on a lot of different articulations, but one thing that really helps is completely like bringing your wrist down and playing completely with your finger strength. This would be like I don't know if you can hear this, but like bam, 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 bam. It's complete, like my arm's hanging down like this, but you're just playing with finger strength. And that really helps your fingers like understand like how to like roll down, because if you're doing this, you're using wrist strength, but if you're doing this, you're using your finger strength plus you're using your arm weight distribution. This is hard to face. So I would say different articulations really help, but in the end, what's really going to top the different drilling techniques is slow practice, but figuring out how your arm works and how your fingers work and collaborate in playing passages. I hope that made sense. It's hard to like say it.
Yeah, thanks. Our next question is, how do you phrase? Obviously, as pianists, we're aware that we do not have the use of vibrato or crescendoing within a single note. So how do you convey the sense of phrasing and motion in between notes? And how do you create color changes when there is just that limited action of a hammer hitting a string? So let's have Soda, and then Alex, and then Andrew.
There's a great recording of Barenboim giving a talk. I'm sure many of you have already seen it, but someone asked him the same question. He's like, okay, well, obviously piano can't crescendo within a note, so how do you actually phrase or crescendo on a piano, and he's like, no, you're wrong. Piano can crescendo within a note. And the thing is, like, his point is you have to believe that the piano can, otherwise you're never going to make it crescendo. I think, maybe part of that is just like him being very like, Barenboim, but there is a certain truth to it. Like, I think the most important thing about phrasing is you have to know what you want in your own head before you try to do it. It doesn't work the other way around. You can't like make something happen and then like it. You have to know what you're going for. And it's the combination of having that sort of foresight and imagination and then practicing it and figuring out how to create it, like just technically. There are some general rules of thumb, like after a long note, you have to play under, right? So otherwise it just sounds jarring. And even if you're crescendoing, if you have a held note, you can't play the next one louder. There are like things like how you, like Christopher mentioned earlier, how you drop your wrist and use like arm weight rather than just like slapping your fingers on the keys, right? That helps with tone production a lot. And depending on who your teacher is and what piece you're playing, you could talk about tone production and phrasing for like hours. But the one thing that's like universal, no matter where you are, is you just have to know what you want.
Yeah, I think Soda made a really great point there. It's really important to kind of keep that sound sort of sustained in your mind, and that really makes a difference in the feeling that the audience gets, that this music is lyrical and that it's continuing. And then I think observing the rhythm of things also really helps, so that for example, if you have I definitely already touched on this in the previous question, but it's not only, I think, about making the music sort of sound good or like not having like unnecessary accents, but it's also really helpful for producing like a crescendo in this sort of line of 16th notes, is if you really observe the rhythm and have like the first group of each 16th sort of accented, and then the notes in between sort of serve, although they're like softer, they still kind of serve to kind of carry the music over to the next group of 16th notes. And then that group of 16th notes, like the first note of that group will be slightly louder, and then it actually will have like the effect. It will have the effect of like a crescendo or of like something that's really sustained. So that's also really important in my view.
So going off of what Soda and Andrew said, when you play music, you have to think as if it's also a language. Because music and English have a very striking similarity, and it's that we use both to tell a story. But in order to tell a story, we need to first know what our story is, right? If you play a piece and you don't know exactly where you're going or what you want to do with it, you're not gonna. It's going to sound strange, and it's not gonna sound natural, right? And when we play our music and we play the notes, we want to use the notes to tell the story, correct? So you have to make the music tell the story by itself. You have to play the notes. You can't let the notes play you, right? So we have to be very mindful and cognizant of what our story is. And phrasing it just comes as experience, and we just use that to tell our story.
Cool. Thank you for that. Our last question for this block, and then we will have live Q&A, is what trait or traits of your favorite soloist playing do you admire the most? And what do you do to try and achieve that trait yourself? What strategies do you employ to strive towards that golden standard you love so much? So we'll start with Soda and then go to Alex and Chris.
Well, clearly everyone knows I'm already a fan of Barenboim, but a couple other soloists who I really admire are this guy named Julius Katchen, who is famous for doing recordings of Brahms, not much else, but that's his niche. Radu Lupu, I would say Sokolov, and also Joseph Kalkstein. I think the one thing they have in common, which I really, I guess, which influences my playing, is just tone quality. Like, they're pretty different pianists in all other regards. They play with very different styles, but tone matters a lot to them.
Okay, so my favorite soloist probably is Evgeny Kissin at the current, at the moment. I just want to make it very clear that I will probably never reach the level of success that Kissin is at. But what we have to do is, when we look at the famous soloists, there's always some uniqueness to them. And we can steal a little bit from their uniqueness, and we can try to copy it into our playing. But at the end of the day, the music has to be yours. You can't just copy someone else's playing, because it's not you. And we can tell it's not, when you play, we can tell that it's not your true expression of the music. Yes, we can take this from Andras Schiff. We can take this from Barenboim. We can take this from Zimmerman. But at the end of the day, the music has to be yours. And that's what's so great about music. It's because when we write the music, it's all the same on paper. Everyone has the same music. But when we play it out, everyone sounds different. Everyone sounds different. And everyone sounds unique. And that's the true beauty of music. We don't have to copy someone else. That's what I have to say. Just be yourself when you want to play.
I completely agree with Alex when you have to be yourself when you play. I back when I was a young little boy and I didn't know what I was doing, I listened to a recording of somebody playing the piece, and I'm like, perfect, that's exactly how I'm gonna play it. But that never really happens, because it's not your style, it's not your personality that's seeping through into your music. So what I really think is that the golden standard isn't somebody else. It's based off somebody else and based off another person, and it's what you're eventually aiming at into your own interpretation. So I'm basically talking about interpretation. I really think that you should listen to a lot of different recordings, as many as you can, of the piece you're playing, because that way you get more ideas. See how other people are playing. Take little sections, like Alex said. I like this part, so I'm going to take it from him and I'm going to put it into my playing. Or your teacher tells you something and you really like how she played it or something, so you apply that into your playing. But in the end, what it's all going to happen is it's piecing little bits together to make your own story of a piece. Chopin ballades are a great example. Everybody has their own unique interpretation of the piece, no matter which one it is, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I used to say I want to play exactly like Zimmerman, but now I look back and there are parts that match with Zimmerman and there are parts that don't exactly match with Zimmerman or even Ashkenazi or other people. So I really think that you should try to find your own uniqueness. That's why I like to sing when I play, because it really helps me figure out how I'm going to interpret it and how my vibe is and how I want to vibe to the piece. And I think that's really what helps you find a unique and golden standard.
Cool. Thanks for all of the knowledge. I've learned a lot. Okay, so we're gonna wrap that section up and transition into a Q&A. You guys can private message me questions, or in between when I ask, you can unmute and ask. But I did get some questions throughout our panel so far, so I will be reading those off. Advice on fast octave scales, 16th notes at over 100 beats per minute.
Stay away from all costs. But if you generally, as we've mentioned time and again, practice it slowly. Start slow, and work your way up. Specifically for octaves, especially if it's that fast, you're probably not jumping around too much. So, as we've said, work on just pinky alone, thumb alone, and work on the connection between those. That way, because if you're hitting one of these, you're basically guaranteed to hit the other as long as you're keeping your hand shape consistent, right? So you're essentially just moving one of these. You don't have to focus on both notes because your hand distance is the same between each octave and each octave, correct? So if as long as we hit one of them, the other one should naturally fall in place, if you know what I mean. But just in general, take it slow first. Learn it very well at slow tempo, and then that will help you speed it up.
I could just add something real quick. This is something my viola teacher said, but it has applied for me at least to piano playing also, but just, and specifically with fast octaves. But if you're trying to relax something like your wrists when you're playing repeated octaves, relax the thing above that, like in your body. So like if you're trying to relax your wrists, like relax your forearms. And if you're trying to relax your forearms, relax your like shoulders, and then just keep going up until you like relax from your back. I guess like a thing a lot of string players say is like play from the back. I think it applies to piano as well.
Cool. Our next question is how to memorize effectively and how to avoid memory slips. Some of these questions are actually pretty broad and things that we might have been planning to discuss in future webinars. So these responses are going to be pretty brief, and then we might go more in depth at a future episode.
I can answer the memory slip one. I had a lot of memory slips throughout my life, like a lot more than I would actually want. And I still have them, but one way that I try my best not to have memory slips is really, I think it goes down to three things: is muscle memory, like practice a lot more, then you can have more muscle memory. But if you don't have perfect pitch, like me, you're kind of screwed in a slow section because you're trying to think like, what's the next note? And then you forget the next note. So that's when really muscle memory comes in, and you have to trust yourself. Sometimes there's like a 50-50 chance if the note is right or not, and you have to just pray that it's right. Another way you can avoid it is knowing like the outline of the score, like what passage is on what page or like what location on a page, like the physical score. And then that kind of helps you track through where you're playing in the piece. And it really helps you like scan out or like map out where you are. And it helps you like recover from memory slips or even prevent them. And the last thing is memorizing the notes. And this is all for if you don't have perfect pitch, because I don't know what it's like to have perfect pitch. So, and I heard like a lot of people like are able to like know what note's next, even if they have a memory slip, but I don't. So in slow sections, sometimes you have to memorize what note is there. And this is from really a lot of experience or like a lot of playing. Like, you know what sections are like rough for you and memory wise, especially in like when you're playing a slow Bach fugue or something, which are hard to memorize. And you really have to memorize what notes are next, and you have to expect where memory slips might happen beforehand, before you perform. And that really helps prevent them, I think.
Cool. Like I said, we'll probably go more in depth on some of these topics in the future. We had a question about any suggestions or tips for Mozart K330 first movement.
I have one, and I think it's really important in the first movement to maintain a really consistent tempo throughout, because it really goes into many different rhythms, or at least a handful of different rhythms, that it's a little bit hard to keep track of what exactly that tempo is, because sometimes you'll have 16th notes in the right hand, but then later you have the eighth notes, I like dun dun dum bum bim bum bim bum bim bum bum bum. Like yeah, I'm not great at singing, but yeah. So whenever those like changes happen, I think it's really important to still remember what the basic rhythm of the piece is.
Cool, thank you. We have two more, and then I will go over, or I will open it up to anyone who wants to ask. Any suggestions for the left hand really fast scales for 5 measures in Chopin Etude, Opus 25, number 7? If anyone of our panelists has played it before.
I've played it before, but what was the question again?
Left hand really fast scales continuous for 5 measures.
Oh, that one. Okay. Well, I think you should practice it like any other scale, how you, as discussed earlier in this webinar, like slow practice and then speeding it up and then just like going for it. And it does give me scale vibes. So yeah.
Cool. Our other question was actually something that we were going to address later, but we will probably be cutting it soon. We have one more section that we're going to go over, and then we'll probably have a practice techniques part 2 seminar because there's just so many great questions that we have. So I will open it up if anyone wants to ask a question right now. This is your time. We have one more section about injury, and then we'll open it up again, but in case you need to go. Are we good? I did get a lot of questions sent to me, so you can continue to do that if you think of anything. Okay, so the last...
Yeah. My bad.
Oh, no worries. Okay, the last section we'll cover today is not getting injured. So, how do I avoid getting injured? Soda, do you have a response for us?
Sure. I think I'm fortunate in that I've never gotten injured playing piano, but I don't think it's like necessarily, I think it's mostly a luck thing. If you do anything for more than a certain amount of hours a day, you're going to get like overuse at some point if you're not smart about it. And I definitely haven't been super smart always about my playing. One thing I'm trying to do is, I have been for the past couple of years, is actually like physically being fit as well. Piano performance is kind of like a sport, honestly. It's a very athletic thing. You need to be able to be sharp both mentally and physically, especially if you're sitting at the bench for like 5 hours a day or more. Like go to the gym, lift, make sure you can do squats and like bench at least like a decent amount before you it's like honestly something just like piano playing, it's something you have to build up to slowly, but like it really pays off. Like you have to make sure your body can handle what you're doing at the piano. I think we take for granted a lot of times that like piano is like some artsy thing, but really you also have to, like when we talk about technique, it's not just about like how many notes you can play in a second, but also like how long your muscles can last. And if you're not smart about it, if you keep practicing 5 hours a day without like doing any other, like any sort of like really like physical warm up or like build up to that sort of like strenuous routine, then you're going to eventually have like muscle attrition and your body will fail you.
Yeah, for sure. One of our parents, Julia, had to leave unfortunately, but she was going to share about Alexander and Taubman technique, so I'm going to read her description out for you guys. Okay, so Alexander technique and Taubman technique work hand in hand. Alexander technique focuses on the alignment between the head, neck, and spine, and this can be applied not only to music, but also in improving your posture and form in daily life as well. For piano, make sure your shoulders and arms are relaxed. Place your hands on the piano and sort of flop your elbows out like a chicken a few times until you're loose and free. Taubman technique uses similar principles but applies them more to the alignment all the way from the shoulder to the fingertips. This alignment is natural and it's important to maintain it while you're playing. For example, if you're playing near the middle C, look down and notice what position your arm is in and see if it's twisted. If it is, a simple solution is just to lean back so your forearm is straight again. You can Google them both for more information, but both Alexander technique and Taubman technique are useful in using less finger to play, but rather your body weight. So that was very informational. I have actually personally never studied formally either of those. Okay, and so our last question for the evening that has been planned out is going to be, how do I know when I've reached my limit, and what's the difference between being tired and overusing my muscles? And along with that, how often should I be taking breaks to ensure I'm still focused, but I'm not going to get injured? So I think we'll start with Ophir, and then have Alex, and Elizabeth, and Chris.
Ophir left, by the way.
Oh, never mind. Okay. Alex?
Okay, so it's when I was just starting out for piano, I had a lot of problems with tension, both in my shoulders, like my entire arms. So like this would lead to like frequent pains, aches, sores, etc. Like I've never really gotten seriously injured from piano, but like I've had my days like where like things start to hurt. So some of these problems still live to today. And as a general rule of thumb, when you're playing piano, if anything hurts, you're doing something wrong. Like, it mostly your shoulders will get tense and like things will start to tense up. And like if you start feeling sore, that's generally not good. Like it's okay to feel tired, like you've played a lot and you feel tired. But like your body should tell you the difference between when you're about to get injured or you're on your road to injury, and your body should know the difference between like going to injury and I'm just tired right now. So generally, just listen to what your body's telling you. Like your body will tell you what you need to know.
Elizabeth?
Okay, so I think knowing your limits is just something that's important for everything in piano and outside of piano. So only you know your limits best, and it's good to kind of maybe test yourself, I guess, and then and you can always try to expand your limits, but definitely if you feel tired in any way, if something hurts in your wrist or forearm or whatever, definitely something is wrong. And also keep in mind we are all humans, so we'll always have off days. We'll always have days we don't feel like we've reached our limit, but that's okay. And as long as you just keep going, you'll definitely do well in a lot of things, not only piano.
Is it my turn? Yeah, okay. I have not gotten injured yet, thankfully, partially because like I haven't practiced that much yet, but like
I
but
you keep saying yet. Like you're expecting to get injured.
yeah, watch me get injured tomorrow. One thing I do is that I try not to get off the bench, but I try to relax somewhere near the piano. Because what happens is like when I go to the refrigerator to get like a cup of water, I end up like getting myself distracted with my phone or like doing something else, and then like playing piano like an hour later. And that really breaks up your focus. So one thing I do is like I stretch my back on the piano bench. Like I lie down and then I just like stretch as far back as I can. And that really like helps your like mind snap back from like your blurry like practicing state, and it gets you back into focus a bit. And I think like the difference between like pain and tiredness is really seeing if you're sweating or not when you're playing, because like Soda said, piano is a sport. So if you're really practicing, you would be sweating, like especially on a hot day, you're like steaming down, or if you're playing like a Liszt etude or something. So, and physical pain really, like, I think a good thing to tell is like swelling. You can see if it swells or not, or if it starts like getting throbbing or like gets hotter in that section of that skin. That's really when you're like about to get injured. So you have to kind of like have knowledge about that and control yourself.
Cool. We had one more question pop in through the chat. How to prevent arm stiffness when playing scales?
No one answering. I can answer this one. One thing I learned from Professor Douglas Humphreys, who's a professor, a head chair piano person at Eastman, I think. Yeah. He told me, like, when you're playing scales or any passage going up or down, always have knowledge about what your hand like has a U shape to it. So you should never try playing the same thing like this or like this or like this. You should always like know like which finger's longer, so that when you're playing more up towards your pinky, you can rotate your wrist up and then like balance towards it. So this is basically like the walking technique. And I think this really helps you. Wait, can you repeat the question? I got like the source.
How to prevent arm stiffness?
Yeah. And this really like helps relax your arm because your wrist is moving instead, and you're using your whole arm weight distribution instead of the stiff forearm distribution. And I think that helps.
Okay, I think we're gonna open it up if anyone has any questions. Like I said, well, okay, I guess we can answer one question that was asked earlier. That was actually, we were gonna skip over it, but advice when you feel unmotivated to practice and still have to practice.
You should never feel unmotivated to practice. If you're unmotivated to practice, there's either something wrong. There's either something wrong with your repertoire, or there's something wrong with your practice itself. Your practice, playing piano takes a lot of creativity. When you come to the piano bench, you need to sit down and think that I'm going to achieve something today, and I'm going to create something new today, or improve something and make something better today, right? But if you come into the practice room and you already have a mindset of like, I don't want to do this, you're not really going to accomplish anything, because you're going to do, you're going to have, as Chris said, mindless practice, and you're not going to achieve any of your goals. So, and a great way to prevent this is to actually set goals themselves. You want to have like a major focus for the day. You want to strive for perfection in like a certain area, or you want to fix a certain spot in a piece, right? So the greatest way to avoid being bored when playing piano is to set goals and measure yourself as you play, because that's like the only way because goals are inherent, as science has shown over and over again. They are inherent motivators. As you check that box, your brain releases chemicals that are like, hooray, I did it. And like you keep on, and you start throwing more and more time into the piano itself. So I would recommend setting goals. If you have nothing else to, if you're rock bottom bored by playing this instrument, set goals and you'll see improvement.
Okay, cool. I think that's all the questions we have. Again, if you would like to ask a question now, go ahead.
And I just want to say one more thing. If you don't feel comfortable asking a question or anything like that, always feel free to email us at harmonyforhope2020@gmail.com. I put it in the chat. And also, we have a link tree that contains all of our updated, up-to-date, important links to all of our social media handles and all of that good stuff. And if you haven't already, feel free to join us in our project.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and put our panelists' emails in the chat right now in case you want to reach out to them individually. But I think we are pretty much at a close. Thank you so much for coming and
Thank you all for coming.
yeah.
Yes, and we'll be sending out an email maybe tomorrow for the YouTube link to this recording and other information. So thank you so much.
By the way, if you guys are still here, just keep your heads up because we might be coming out with part 2 for practice techniques very soon.
And we'll be having other cool webinars in the near future. So thank you so much for coming.
Can I stop recording now?